Sarah, a loving and caring girlfriend. A loving and caring girlfriend. She will do ... I'm just like, is this the end times, Jordan?
Oh yeah. I saw an article that said, if you have an AI girlfriend and it's not local only, then your AI girlfriend is cheating on you, which is kind of true.
Yeah, that's so true. But also, that's a funny joke. But yeah, oh my God, we're at the end times.
Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show, presented by ATL BitLab. I'm Jordan Bravo, and this is a podcast where we teach you how to take back control of your devices. Sovereign computing means you own your technology, not the other way around.
This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show. I'm Jordan Bravo, and I'm here today with Stephen DeLorme.
Sup?
We want to remind you that you can contact the show by boosting in via fountain.fm and search for ATL BitLab. If you send us a boostagram with a message and some sats attached, we will read it on the show and take your feedback and respond. If you don't want to send in a boost with Fountain or any other method, you can also email us at sovereign@atlbitlab.com, and we will read your feedback and respond to it as well. There's an article that we want to talk about today, and it is about smart TVs. This is a ZDNet article, and we will link this in the show notes so you can go into detail later based on your specific brand of smart TV. But there's something called ACR, Automatic Content Recognition. And this is a tool that tracks your viewing habits that's built into the smart TV's software. And it's on by default. And so this article talks about a little bit what it is. Essentially, it is a protocol or a standard that smart TVs used to collect data about your viewing habits. And this can be used as ad tracking and surveillance. And so it's something that is pretty standard nowadays. I think when most of us hear something like this, we are not surprised anymore because we just assume every device that we buy is tracking us. So smart TVs are one of the things that we have less control over. Smart TVs are very much not sovereign computers. They are completely captured devices that we have little control of. So unless you're a real hardware hacking type person who likes to get in there and tinker with things and flash firmware, which I am not, I'm purely a software person. So that's beyond my ability, and I would guess most people's as well. But if you are just buying an off-the-shelf smart TV, it's most likely has ACR enabled. And so this ZDNet article goes into details for all the different manufacturers of the steps that you can do to disable it. I'm not going to go through the steps because it's just tedious and it wouldn't make for good listening. But Stephen, can you scroll down to the steps and just kind of show all the brands that they list?
Yeah. So we have Samsung, LG, Sony, Hisense, TCL, and other Roku-powered TVs. Okay, so 4 different brands in this article right here.
Yeah, and so if you have one of those brands, this will give you a step-by-step on how to disable it. It's just another thing to take a little bit more privacy back. Obviously, we wish the ideal world would be to have a dumb TV rather than a smart TV where you can then plug in a device you have more control over. But if you have a smart TV, it's probably a good idea to go through and confirm that this is disabled. And if your TV is a brand that's not on here, my guess is there's still a way to do it. So use a search engine, ask AI. That's going to be your friend if you want to do that. Stephen, do you have any additional thoughts about this?
Oh, this is creepy. I mean, I'm actually a little surprised at how this works. I was like kind of perusing the article here and reading about how ACR works. ACR does this by capturing continuous screenshots and cross-referencing them with a vast database of media content and advertisements. ACR can capture and identify up to 7,200 images per hour, approximately 2 images per second. That's wild. So, I mean, you can have a lot of apps that come like pre-installed on these smart TVs like Netflix and YouTube and other content streaming services. And I was not under any illusion that I wasn't being tracked by those service providers, right? Like, YouTube and Netflix are going to try and, record as much data as they can about your viewing habits and what you watch. And I guess when you brought this article up, I kind of assumed that ACR was just some kind of spec for these sorts of services to be able to share information with marketers or with the TV manufacturer about what is being watched. But that's not what it looks like. It looks like it's actually just the TV itself is occasionally taking screenshots of what you're watching and comparing that with a database of other media content and advertisements to identify the content that you're watching.
Yeah, it's almost
That's
like
weird.
an agreed upon surveillance API that's agnostic to the app, and advertisers and other people can just hook into it and glean this information.
I at this point, I don't even know if it's agreed upon. I don't know if that would make it better or worse for me, but it seems like these TVs can just, take a screenshot and record, and that kind of happens at the level of the TV operating system. I'm not really sure that there's anything that Netflix or YouTube or Prime Video could do to stop a screenshot from being taken at the level of the TV operating system.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So this is less about the apps and more about the OS level and the manufacturer level.
Yeah, again, this is my first time reading about this, so I'm not sure, but that's at least what I'm seeing here. That's my understanding based on this, just kind of skimming this article. Let me put it this way. If the TV manufacturer was collaborating with all of the major over-the-top streaming providers, they wouldn't need to take screenshots every 2 seconds. They could just say, hey, YouTube, hey, Prime Video, share with me what the user is watching. The fact that they're having to take a screenshot or have the capability to take a screenshot every 2 seconds and identify what you're looking at tells me that it's almost like a separate surveillance apparatus.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Well, I am definitely going to see if this is set up on my TV and turn this shit off.
I do want to talk about some takeaways from this in addition to what the article lists. So let's think outside the box here and shift the paradigm, to use some business jargon. Taking these steps to disable ACR is definitely a good first step. But let's think about, why are we possibly in this situation in the first place? Well, it's because we have a quote unquote smart TV with an operating system and applications that we have no control over. So the most ideal sovereign computing device when it comes to TVs would be to have a dumb TV, or TV without the smart TV capability built in. Just a regular TV for many years. It was basically like a monitor. You just plug in your HDMI or whatever interface, and it just shows, it's literally just piping video data from the source device. However, now you have a whole little computer with an operating system and apps that can be developed by companies like Netflix, et cetera. And so now there's a whole layer of stuff that's going on that we don't really know much about, above and beyond just like straight hardware and firmware translation of data. And so This, of course, has opened up the door for stuff like this, like surveillance, and at both the operating system level and the application level. So what can you do about this? Well, you can opt to not use the smart capabilities. It's hard to find TVs these days that don't have smart capabilities. In fact, it's probably impossible, but you don't have to use the smart capabilities. If you do not connect your smart TV to the internet, it can never spy on you. I mean, it can try to spy on you, but it can never send that data anywhere. So if you want to keep everything local on your TV, that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. And what you do is you just treat it like a good old-fashioned TV. You are going to plug in HDMI with whatever source you're using, and then let the TV just be a TV. Now, if you are plugging something in like Apple TV or Roku or that kind of thing, Amazon Fire Stick, you still will have some surveillance problems at the app level, but at least the TV itself is not spying on you and doing this kind of shenanigans like this ACR. And then when we can talk about ways to mitigate the app level too. For example, I'm thinking maybe this requires a whole episode in itself or a deep dive in another episode. So let's leave it there for now, and then we'll get into this in another episode.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So if anybody knows anything more about ACR, maybe if any of the conclusions that I jumped to there were inaccurate, you can boost in and let us know. And whatever your concerns may be about the privacy around content streaming apps, boost in, let us know. We'll talk about it in the future some more.
And don't forget, you can also email us at sovereign@atlbitlab.com. All right, so today's main topic that we're going to dive into is how to use AIs and LLMs privately. LLMs are a booming topic these days, and rightly so. They enable some really revolutionary productivity. And so when we use these LLMs, typically we're interacting with a web app front end, and then it's connecting to LLMs running on a company's servers. And if these companies go ahead.
I want to jump in real quick and just define for anyone who, doesn't spend their time in tech all the time. LLM is a large language model, and it's basically the technology under the hood that powers a chat bot like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that.
Yes, thank you. And so when people talk about AI in popular culture and the news, they're typically referring to LLMs, large language models. There is, I don't know, would image generation fall under the category of LLM, or is that a separate category?
Separate category, but related. In my mind, I categorize it as generative AI, like AI that generates stuff. And some of those are things like large language models, which is kind of like a text to text. It's like text input, text output. And then you have the art models. I'm not sure exactly what the technical term for that is. It might be diffusion model, I think, but that's like text to image. And you've got a whole variety of different kinds of generative models. You also have audio to text for like transcription, and you have text to video, and you've got image to video. So there's like a whole wide universe of generative AI models. But yeah, definitely I think the one that's most common among like the majority of people, at least in the Western world or the tech adjacent world, is like LLMs, chatbots.
Got it. Thanks for that. That makes sense. So you have the broad category of AI, and then under that you might have generative AI, and then under that you might have one would be image generation, and another might be large language models.
Yep.
Okay. So within those two broad categories, LLMs is typically what people think of when they're thinking of ChatGPT, Grok. I'm blanking on the other ones now. Google Gemini, Claude. Exactly. And so these are the ones where you're talking into a chat interface, and you send a question or something, goes to the company's servers. They run it through an LLM, and then they send it back, and you get a text response, or maybe it'll write some code for you. But typically, that's what we're all familiar with. Now, the issue, the problem that we would like to tackle here is, how do we take advantage of productivity that LLMs give us without completely doxing all of our information or just feeding it to the surveillance machine? It's worth noting that OpenAI, which is not A-Open, for those of you who are unaware, the name is sort of a misnomer, probably intentionally, but that's besides the point. OpenAI, Google, Microsoft's GitHub, Copilot, and I think they have another LLM I'm not really remembering. But the point is, these companies, their whole business model is collecting as much data as possible and using it to train these LLMs, and then using it for surveillance, for adware and ad content and data sharing and collection. So all of these things are par for the course for these companies, and we should not be surprised that they're doing this anymore. I mean, we've been paying attention to this stuff for long enough. We should know this. Something to note is that an ex-chief of the NSA is now on the board of directors of OpenAI. So you can see there's this direct government surveillance to big tech pipeline that shouldn't surprise us, but still disconcerting to see. So how do we use AI more privately? Well, there's kind of two different ways you can go about it. The first one we're going to talk about is the maybe easier way that doesn't require as much technical know-how and setup, and that's going to be using more private AI providers. These providers are not, this is not going to be a completely trustless approach. This is just going to be a trust minimized approach, and also shifting trust to more privacy reputable sources. So the first one that we want to talk about is called Maple. Maple, I think the website is trymaple.ai. And this is a cool project. It's using a technology called confidential computing. And this is a little bit of trivia. This is created by some of the founders that originally created Mutiny Wallet. And after Mutiny Wallet was shuttered as a project, most of the creators of Mutiny, they are now working on this TryMaple. And TryMaple is actually it's an AI chat, just like ChatGPT, for example. But where it differs is they are using the confidential computing hardware on Amazon. It's for the technically minded folks out there, this is called Amazon Nitro, and it is a trusted or trustless computing platform. Is that the right term, Stephen?
I think some people call it that. I think I would call it confidential computing. I think they're roughly the same thing.
Some of you might have heard the term secure enclave when it comes to like hardware on your iPhone or Android phone or something like that. And this is a similar concept where they are manufacturing specific hardware to run cryptography in a way that minimizes the trust of whoever's running it. So if you want to run AI on a professional hardware, which all of these companies do, so that the user doesn't have to run their own expensive hardware, you have to run a server. And the problem is, as a user, how do we know that that server is secure and not leaking all of the data? Well, the way that Maple and this confidential computing approach works is at a hardware level, again, you're shifting the trust here. Now the hardware manufacturing process has to be trusted, but assuming that process is not corrupted, what happens is when this is running on Amazon servers, without confidential computing, you could have an angry or a malicious sysadmin actually see all of the data the computing that's taking place. But with something like confidential computing on Amazon's AWS Nitro, it's essentially a black box and uses to the sysadmin or whoever is administering it, but it is provably secure, cryptographically, provably running the same code that it's attesting to. So Stephen has just demonstrated TryMaple or Maple by asking about confidential computing. And is there anything in there that you think is useful that you want to talk about?
Not particularly. I think it's a deep topic. And so since I think what we've been doing on this show thus far has been kind of actionable sovereign computing things. I don't know that I want to dive too deep into some of these technical details because I think your explanation is pretty much sufficient. As long as, they're running the right hardware and all of that, then, in theory, it's provable that, the compute is indeed confidential. Personally, I think it's a good way to move forward as a society because I would like to see more products built on top of these things because, like not everyone's going to self-host a file server, right? And so I think that if you do adopt confidential computing as a startup or as a company or whatever, then you can offer that greater level of privacy to your users, and the users can actually benefit from massive amounts of compute that are in the cloud, right? Like it's kind of nice having cloud computers that power a lot of the services that we use on a daily basis, and it's kind of like this almost shared resource. You can benefit from those compute clusters when you need them without needing to run that stuff locally. So, but the trade-off is privacy. So confidential computing is one of those things to me that just seems like a no-brainer in terms of being able to move forward. As far as this service go, I will say I do like Maple and I love OpenSecret, the company that like makes the technology behind Maple. Having said that, I think right now the only model that they run, if I'm not mistaken, is just the, what's it called, Llama 70B. And I have asked it some complicated questions before and it kind of stumbled a little bit. If you're used to using GPT-4o or like GPT-01, you might find the Llama model a little bit lacking. Or if you're, a fan of the Claude models and all that, you might find it a little bit lacking. Having said that, this is kind of a proof of concept of OpenSecret. If you're asking this thing, less complicated and mathematical questions, I think Maple will totally get the job done for you. And there's nothing to prevent the Try Maple project from hosting DeepSeek or other more advanced models in the future. So as a proof of concept of running an LLM in a confidential compute environment, it basically works.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a new project, so they are still, they're not feature complete. They're going to add more in the future, but it is nice to see them doing this. It's fully open source, and so it's a great project to keep an eye on. The next third-party LLM provider that's more privacy focused that we want to talk about is Venice, Venice.AI. And this one was started by Eric Voorhees, fairly well known in the Bitcoin and crypto community. And this one they focus on privacy there's a UX trade-off. And what I mean by that is they do not sync your chat history. So if you were to open this in a browser on one computer and sign in and do some chats, and then you sign in on a different browser on a different computer, it's not going to sync that chat history over. But the upside is that your chats and your history is not being sent to Venice, or at least it's not being saved in any meaningful way. Now, again, we have to trust that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. Their whole business model is to be a private LLM provider, and so it's more trustworthy, I would say, than one of these other companies where they make no promises about privacy. In fact, their terms of service are quite to the opposite. One of the cool things about Venice is that they have a bunch of models that you could see. And I've actually paid for a pro membership. I just wanted to try it out because you can pay with Bitcoin. And that's another way in which you're really getting a lot of privacy, because when you pay for ChatGPT or Claude or any of these, you have to use a credit card or a debit card, and that's inevitably tied to your account. You can use something like privacy.com to have a layer of privacy between your bank account and one of these companies, but ultimately there is a link there. And so when you pay with Bitcoin on Venice.ai, for example, that to me is a huge selling point.
Looks like they also have image generation built in here too, which is kind of cool.
They do have image generation. We're going to talk about another open source way to do image generation, but this would be competitive with something like, I'm blanking on the name now. What's the big image generation service?
Well, Midjourney is one of my faves. If that's
the
for
one I
image
was
gen-
thinking of, Midjourney.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, that was actually a very snappy image generation. I asked it to make a cypherpunk hacker soldering his own circuit board because he doesn't trust Intel. And we got this guy in a black shirt. He's not soldering. He's really using like one of them skinny screwdrivers, but he's kind of peering at us over the rim of his glasses. Like, I don't trust you. Get the fuck out of my lab.
That's actually kind of a cool image.
Yeah.
I played around with this before and it's decent. If you go to the image style, you can see a bunch of cool options.
Oh, this is weird. Oh, and I get it because it's all like they're called Venice. All of the examples and the image style are all these like, I don't know, Italian Renaissance like masquerade ball masks.
I think it's called Venice for the same reason that Alan Farrington has that post and then book Bitcoin is Venice. And it's sort of about the Renaissance era in Venice, where we are now experiencing a new renaissance with things like Bitcoin and sovereign computing type technology advances.
I was trying to give it to me in a GTA style, but whatever. I won't waste your time playing with this.
Yeah,
cool.
no, this is fun. I definitely recommend people take a look at it and try it out. I've used it to some good effect, and it feels good knowing that my searches and history are more private. But like you said, these open source models, while competitive in some respects with the closed source ones, they're not making gazillions of dollars. And so you are often seeing the features and the UX lag behind ChatGPT and Claude and that kind of thing.
I gotta say though, this one is actually seems like a competitor. I mean, definitely, this isn't quite mid-journey level, but this one seems to be catching up. I might have missed when you said earlier, but do they offer any insight as to how this runs? Is this also in a confidential compute environment?
This is not using confidential computing. This is more like they are just proxying it to their own server, and they are promising that they don't log your chat history. So this is
Okay.
more of a shifting of trust. But again, they are basing their business model on, we are providing privacy. That's why you're paying us or using our service in the first place. And so that's kind of what you're going on there. And then the other thing, like I mentioned, this is all in your whole history and stuff is in local storage. So ostensibly your account is not, your chat history specifically is not being sent or saved on the servers.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Oh yeah, different trust model than with Maple.
Yep. The next service I wanted to mention is called Kagi, Kagi. And Kagi is a newer search engine, is their main product. And they advertise themselves as a privacy first search engine that you actually pay for to get a premium search. But they also have an AI assistant. And so if you buy their pro model, their pro subscription, you get access to the Kagi AI. And while I have not used this one personally, I've heard a lot of good things about it. And supposedly it's got some good UX and a pretty powerful model.
So they can use looks like all of the Claude models, a bunch of OpenAI models, Mistral, Google, Meta, Alibaba, and DeepSeek, of course. Looks like they have a lot of different LLMs available. And just on that note, I mean, one thing worth mentioning here with Kagi, and I'm trying to see if this applies to Venice as well. So when it comes to something like Venice, it looks like they're running Llama, Mistral, Dolphin, DeepSeek. So they're probably hosting all of those models on their own. When we go to Kagi, and we can see that they have LLMs available in the assistant. Some of these, they might be self-hosting, like perhaps the DeepSeek or the Llama models, but for the Anthropic and OpenAI models, and I don't know about Google Gemini, but maybe that one as well. But definitely with the Anthropic and OpenAI ones, they're probably just using the API for those services. So your data is still, if you use Kagi and if you choose an Anthropic or OpenAI model, your data is still being sent back to Anthropic and OpenAI. Having said that, it may be that Kagi doesn't identify all of your separate chats to those services. So for example, if I were to use GPT-4o from OpenAI inside of Kagi, and I had 10 separate chats, OpenAI might see that as like 10 different users, like completely different users. Or it might see that data just like all mixed in with like all of Kagi's requests, right? Whereas if I went through OpenAI directly, I would of course have an account that I log in and I would have like 10 different chat histories with ChatGPT. So it's good. I think it's great, but just throwing that out there that like if you do use this service and you do choose one of these proprietary models, you're still sending some data back to them. So word of caution there.
That's a great point. This is a spectrum here, right? If you could think of using OpenAI or Anthropic directly through them, that's probably the least private on one end of the spectrum. And then if you use Kagi, and your Kagi is acting kind of like a proxy between you and Anthropic or OpenAI, that would be a little bit more private because like you said, it's sort of like a VPN provider where the VPN provider has a whole bunch of users and all of their traffic is sort of mixed together and anonymized. And in the same way here, you might think all of Kagi's users going to Anthropic, let's say, all of that traffic is going to look like it's coming from Kagi versus you as an individual. And so all of your searches and chat history is not going to be tied together to your individual account. But like Stephen was saying, your chat history, the things you send to it are still going to be on Anthropic servers, on OpenAI servers, because by necessity, it has to be processed there.
Yeah, and depending, and so it's like you just have to be careful depending on what your privacy threat model is that you don't dox yourself with your question. So if you're asking something like, what is a good JavaScript library for doing XYZ thing? It's like, well, that might be a little more innocuous. There's a lot of JavaScript developers out there in the world, right? But if you ask for like something like, what are good restaurant options near 123 Main Street, Townsville, USA? It's like, well, you've just given out your address right there. So you've kind of potentially identified yourself.
Yep, exactly. And so if we keep moving on that spectrum from least sovereign computing to more sovereign computing, the next one I would say after Kagi would be something like Venice, where we just talked about, where they are running their own open source models on their server, and they are purposely not logging your history and doing data collection on it. But in the end, you're still having to send data to that server. I would say maybe slightly more along the sovereign computing spectrum would be Maple that we talked about first, because they are doing the same thing where you have to send data to them, but they're using this confidential computing hardware and software in order to run it in a way that minimizes trust on their part. Then let's talk now about moving even further along that spectrum to more private and sovereign computing with LLMs. And that's going to be running models locally or self-hosting. That I kind of say those as two different things, because you can run a model locally where your client lives. So for example, you could just run it on your laptop, where your laptop is going to have both the interface that you type into and also the model. But then if you want to get really advanced with it, or really if you want to go more into an advanced setup, you could self-host the model on a server and then connect to it from any client, so your laptop or your mobile device, etc. So the first thing we're going to look at is called Ollama. Ollama is a program that you can download on Mac, Windows, or Linux. And once it's downloaded, it's got an interface where you can select any open source model. And Stephen, go ahead and click on the models. Let's take a look at all the options that they have. So they've got things like DeepSeek, Llama, Mistral, and these are all of the well-known large language models that are open source and fully available, free and open source. Once you have Llama installed, you can search through and download any of these models, and it's going to run completely locally. And then I believe it's just a CLI when you first download it, but we're going to show in a moment here another thing you can run that will give you a GUI interface in your browser, the same way you would expect from ChatGPT or one of these other options.
And I'll go ahead and say that even the CLI was, I thought, pretty easy to use. Having said that, I'm a little more comfortable with CLI than the average person. But as far as CLIs go, this one was pretty easy, I thought. When it comes to downloading models, there's a popular website you can go to called Hugging Face. And Hugging Face is, I don't know how to describe it. Like,
they're kind of like the GitHub for open source models.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like the GitHub for open source models. The problem is that whenever I go and find a model that I want to use, I have no idea how to start using it because I'm just not one of these like cracked machine learning engineers. They're always like, oh, here's instructions on how to use this model. And then they give you like a bunch of, I don't know, Python commands. Well, this one's in Chinese because it's DeepSeek, but they'll just give you like, there's no consistent way to just install all of these models, at least that I found. I found it very, very confusing. I'm used to the web development world where everything is, run either through a package manager like, NPM or back in the day, Composer. I just don't know how to work with any of the instructions on Hugging Face. So Ollama to me is just like a dream because once you install it on your computer, you can just like open up your terminal on Linux or Mac and you can just type Ollama ls and it'll list out all the models you have installed. And you could say Ollama install and just type in the name of the model and it'll install it and it'll download it and run it. And then you just type Ollama run and the model name and it starts up a chat. And the chat is entirely local to your computer. So yeah, I thought the whole thing was just a dream to use. Like Ollama made it very, very quick and easy for me to get into running models locally, where Hugging Face was an obstacle to someone of my skill set.
And you said something that I think is key and worth repeating, which is this runs completely locally on your machine. So if you turned on airplane mode or just disconnected from the internet completely, you would still run this and get results. This is not living on any other server and it's not reaching out to any other computer.
That's actually a fun exercise. Pair programming with an AI in a local environment on an airplane.
Exactly. So maybe you're on an airplane with your laptop and for whatever reason they don't have internet that you can connect to. You could just use a local LLM and use it like that. Now, as Stephen mentioned, you have to interact through this via the command line. And for somebody who doesn't want to do that, there's a great option called OpenWebUI. And you could think of this as the graphical counterpart to Ollama. What you would do is you run this and it runs in a browser and then it talks to Ollama on the back end. And so in the same way, it is all running locally, but you're getting that web browser GUI interface that you would expect from one of these other offerings. The cool thing about this is that you can decouple the front end from the back end. So if you wanted to run Ollama on your server, which is always on, you could then connect to it from any device remotely. So you could connect to it from your laptop or mobile, and boom, now you have a fully mobile, totally private and self-hosted LLM experience.
I somehow found myself on the OpenWebUI homepage, and this looks like a really great UI. I'm seeing the section here that says top models, and number 1 is based Dolphin Mixtral Dolphin models with a special system problem. That's fine. Number 2 is code rated. That's fine. Number 6, Sarah, a loving and caring girlfriend. She will do ... I'm just like, is this the end times, Jordan?
Oh yeah. I saw an article that said if you have an AI girlfriend and it's not local only, then your AI girlfriend is cheating on you, which is kind of true.
Ooh. Yeah, that's so true. But also, that's a funny joke. But yeah, oh my God, we're in the end times. But
Yeah.
anywho, back to the topic. Yes, this looks really cool. I mean, they have a fun looking little website. They have a white paper. Everybody's got a white paper these days. But that's boring. I'm not going to go through that. But yeah, the screenshots of this look really nice. I remember you demoing this to me several months ago, and it looked good. And it looks like it has grown as a project since then. It's a really simple looking interface that reminds me of ChatGPT. It doesn't present any challenging user experience. So it looks cool. And again, this gets into web hosting and all of that kind of stuff. So I think to use this, you do kind of need to, be a little bit comfortable deploying something. That being said, yeah, you could probably deploy this to something like Netlify or Versal in a somewhat automated way that wouldn't really require you to manage a server directly. But yeah, if you do have the capabilities to self-host both Ollama and this UI, either at your home or on a server, you could provide like a local chat bot for your friends and family, something like that.
And I know that Start OS by Start9, they have a one-click install for, it's called GPT, free GPT, I believe is what it's called. But anyway, if you just look in the Start OS marketplace, they have an LLM you can run locally on your Start9 server.
Very cool.
The next one I want to talk about is for running a local model is GPT for All. And this one is similar to Ollama in that you download the app for Mac, Windows, or Linux, and then you can choose which models you want to run. And I think where this one differs a little bit, I could be wrong, but this one comes with a graphical interface. Do you know if that's correct?
I'm actually not familiar with this one. I'm really not. I have heard the name Nomic before. It's like the company logo that's on here, but I don't really know much about them. So yeah, I'm not familiar with this one.
Okay. Well, for the audience, let's just say that this one is worth looking at.
Oh yeah. If I go to the quick start
it looks
page.
like it does come with it too.
Yeah, it says install GPT for all for your operating system and open the application. You can download it for Windows, for Mac, or for Linux. And then yeah, it's got this nice little UI. It's light mode with some green garnishes, and there's a tab where I can manage all my chats, and then there's another tab where I can choose my models and all that. I'm really kind of curious what the local docs thing is. But it looks cool.
Yeah, so this is another great option. I've been meaning to try this one out, but it looks great. The next one we're going to talk about for local LLMs is LM Studio, Language Model Studio. And this one also has its own graphical interface that you can download for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And you can get started right out of the box with it. Stephen, do you have any experience with this one?
Yeah, I've run this one before. It's pretty handy because it has like the downloading of the models and the running of the models is all bundled into one interface, which makes it pretty accessible and easy if you want to be able to experiment with running these models. This is a word of caution, not just for LM Studio, but really for Ollama and all these projects, is that the easier it is to download the models, the more you just want to experiment and run them. And then, you start to max out your hard drive space pretty quickly. So yeah, just be careful with that. Make sure you have plenty of room on your hard drive before you click download, because it's easy to get trigger happy. Some of these things will be like miniature models that are like 2 gigabytes, and other ones will be like 70 gigabytes. At one point, I was trying to download the most hardcore Uber DeepSeek model, and it ended up being like a 70 gigabyte download. And I had enough room on my hard drive. And then I was like, wait a minute, this computer only has like 32 gigs of RAM. There's I don't even think there's any way that I can actually run this model because there's not enough room and RAM for this entire model. I think that's how that stuff works. So yeah, these tools are really great and they make it way easier to download, but you also got to make sure you have the system resources to back it up. But yeah, I vouch for LM Studio. It's pretty cool project. It's easy to use.
I guess that's a good time to point out the downsides of running your LLMs locally, which is you have to have, or let me say it this way, your performance and your user experience is going to be very dependent on your hardware. So when you are accessing it on some other company's servers, they're running absurdly expensive hardware to be able to process all of these huge high parameter LLMs, which is going to give you the most accurate results. But when you're running them locally, typically people are running it on their laptop or desktop. And unless you have some seriously powered dedicated GPUs, you're not going to see great performance. So just be aware that you are going to see some slowdown if you try to run these really large models. However, as you saw when we were scrolling through the Ollama models, there are much smaller models that you can use that are specifically designed to run on consumer hardware. And so you might get, let's say, 90% of the effectiveness of those larger models with much less resource requirements. So give those a try and play around with the right balance of model size and accuracy and performance. And I think you'll find a good middle ground.
Yep.
Okay, one last thing we want to discuss. We already covered model LLMs for chat-based interfaces, but we want to talk about image generation. We mentioned this briefly before that Venice.AI could use it. And then you have these more proprietary offerings, such as, again, I'm blanking on the main one, Stephen, if you could help me out there.
Oh, like for image generation? Yeah, I mean, you've got like Midjourney and, Scenario and all those kinds of companies.
Yes, exactly. But you might have heard about Stable Diffusion being an open source model for image generation. Well, there's a tool called Stable Diffusion Web UI that's made by the same company that makes the Stable Diffusion models. And you can host this, and it allows you to interact with your locally hosted Stable Diffusion model in the same way that we talked about with the OpenWebUI interacting with your local LLM. And this will give you that same experience of being able to type into a web UI, telling the LLM what kind of image you want to generate, and it'll spit out an image for you. And so for those of you watching, we have a screenshot here on the screen, and this is showing how you can tweak the different parameters and the different inputs to what you want, and it'll give you different images based on that.
And another one maybe worth highlighting here is ComfyUI. And we actually had a gentleman give a demo of ComfyUI at one of the AI meetups at ATL BitLab, and it's still going through post-production, but that should be on the ATL BitLab YouTube. And I'd actually say you might, depending on what your needs are, you might actually want to look at this. Like if you're more of an artist, designer who's used to working in tools like Adobe Photoshop and After Effects and Blender, Cinema 4D, all that kind of stuff, this might be a tool you'd want to use because, well, it says right here, customize your workflow with custom nodes. So it actually has an interface that's more familiar to the graphics software you might already be familiar with. So it does let you download models and run them locally, and then you can create nodes inside of your interface, which is somewhat similar to how you might structure stuff in like Blender or DaVinci Resolve or one of those kinds of programs. I think even C4D has a node editor now. And so yeah, you make up different nodes for run it through this model and then apply these tweaks and customizations to it and all of that. So it's kind of trying to bridge the world of like the traditional designer, compositor, effects artist software with the generative art world. But if you're more on the developer side of things, I think the Stable Diffusion Web UI is also a great fit because it kind of exposes to you in like one interface like all of the different like numeric parameters that make the art model function under the hood.
I don't want to get too far off topic, but for someone like me who is not experienced in graphical editing and that kind of thing, what does a node refer to in this context?
So, well, it'd probably be easiest if I just pulled up an image real quick. Let's see, where should I go? Right. How do I get to Brave search? I'll just pull up an example of like Blender node editor, maybe. So an example here is we have this image here that I found. Oh, it just went away. So I have this image up on screen of a Blender shader editor, and basically like what we're trying to do is, in this case, the person is trying to make like this cool, like, I don't know, gold texture covered in fungus or whatever to put on this statue here. And to do that, they're starting here with like some kind of texture, and then they're running it through this node right here, which changes the color to be more orange or gold. And then they're running that into this shader thing that applies things like glossiness and reflectivity or lack thereof. So it's kind of just like a way of structuring the data in this like step-by-step like flow that's very repeatable. Yeah, we're getting into complicated like graphic arts territory here, but it's basically like just kind of a common standard that in a lot of advanced graphics applications, they have this like node-based editing system for getting what you want, where you start with inputs on the left-hand side, they go through all the different nodes, and then you end up with a nice looking output on the right-hand side.
And for people listening, this image looks kind of like a diagram or a flow chart with different rectangles all tied together in various ways. All right, well, thanks for that, Stephen. That's all we have to cover on LLMs, hosting them locally. If you would like to know more about this topic or anything else AI, ATL BitLab actually hosts a monthly AI meetup. Stephen, is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, it's on the second Monday of every month as of the date of this recording, but always check the ATL BitLab website or Meetup for the most current details. But it's definitely one of our hottest meetups right now. It's kind of a grab bag of different stuff every month because there's so much excitement about AI that so many people in the Atlanta area have projects that they're hacking on. And so it ends up being really fun. Sometimes we'll, maybe discuss a paper that just came out. Other times we'll have people demoing projects. Like one time a guy demoed machine learning training a pterodactyl skeleton. He also had a car driving around on the floor that was powered by an LLM, and we were typing in commands and telling for it to hunt for a particular object in ATL BitLab. Another time somebody demoed how to jailbreak Claude. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating, and you never know what you're going to get, but it's always a good time.
And they can find out more about that at atlbitlab.com. Remember, you can also email us at sovereign@atlbitlab.com and look for the Sovereign Computing Show when you search for ATL BitLab in fountain.fm or any other podcast player. Anything else you wanted to talk about, Stephen?
I think that's about it. I might have some errata that I think of over the weekend for next time, but I think I'm good for now.
All right. Let us know what you think of the topic. Do you host your own LLMs? Do you use any of these private providers? Are you using the non-private providers? We would love to hear about it and discuss it more. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Catch you later. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.